Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Neighborhood Conversations, where we are having inclusive conversations with inclusive people who are doing amazing things in their neighborhoods. On today's Neighborhood Conversations, we have the amazing KJ, who is someone who I would say is an amazing personal friend of mine. But hey, we're going to have a conversation with him today, and we're going to ask the employment question that it's always asked in an interview. So tell us about himself. But before we do that, I want to welcome the amazing Simone Farmer, who is our new intake coordinator here at Teamwork Cooperative. Simone, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Templeton. I'm well. Super excited to be here with the both of you today. And just kind of having more conversations and yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome, Simone. Today we're going to be highlighting Pride Month. This is our second Pride episode, and we're going to be celebrating Be Queer. Queer's love. That's one of the things that Suzanne, our last episode, said. Queer's love, and that's something that we're going to start off with. KJ, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you here, and so I'm going to start off, like I said, with the employment question that's always asked. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, there we go. Well, thanks for having me. I always love to be in the space of good people having good conversation. So, I am KJ, but like the full government name, gotta give credit where credit is due to the heritage, is Kjeld, Mizpah, Conyers-Steede. And I'm in Halifax now, but the Maritimes is my second home, but my first home is Bermuda. I'm coming from the islands of Bermuda, which is like a little island, collection of islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So I always like to recognize that like when you hear me, you're hearing my heritage and you're hearing the creation of folks who created me to here. Like, as my grandparents used to always said, I'm the dream of the slave, where, I'm here because of the sacrifices of my ancestors and the sacrifices of my country.
Awesome. Wow. KJ, it's so good to have you here and
Yeah.
fellow Caribbean. But is Bermuda even Caribbean? Would you consider
Don't
Caribbean? Let the,
don't
we,
start. Don't
okay,
start.
okay, okay. We won't go there today.
We may not be physically in the Caribbean, but like we
Caribbean at
are
heart.
part of the we're Caribbean at heart. We have the blood, we have the sweat, and the tears of the shared history of the Caribbean.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I will leave it like that, and let's go into dive into the conversation. KJ, we are here to welcome you here to talk about Pride, not only Pride, but the LGBTQ2 plus IA community. Um, just making sure that we spread awareness and education as we continue to move forward. And so, my first question, we've asked this to our first guest that was here. Why do we celebrate Pride? What does it mean to you personally, and historically? Can you share that? Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, when it comes to pride, like first we have to understand that it's privilege to be able to have this conversation and feel safe. You feel me what I'm saying?
Yep.
Where like my journey to self-acceptance and self-understanding has been a tough one, where I spent 19 years of my life in the closet, not because of I just thought I'll be weird or anything like that. I spent 19 years in the closet because of the toxic culture that the Caribbean has around individuals a part of the LGBT plus community. So, and I'm young, so like we should celebrate Pride to let folks know that there are people around the world that still cannot celebrate Pride. And when we celebrate Pride, it's to recognize folks that the fight is still being fought, and to like showcase the intersectionality of the community.
Right.
Like I think we are so quick to look at Pride as a party. We're gonna get these new toys, rainbow fever and everything like that. But at the end of the day, it's a social movement that looks at decolonizing our approach to how we develop structures. So I celebrate Pride because I look at everything as a systems thinker and looking at policy and community building and all that fun stuff. So I
Right.
celebrate Pride to let folks know that the fight's still being fought for our brothers and sisters around the world in countries where folks can't have these conversations. So that's why I celebrate it. And I celebrate it because of the people who paved the way. Like I look at Barrett Rustin, for example, who no one knows who he is, but he is literally the architect who created the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like he, for 4 decades after Martin Luther King, this openly black gay male went to the streets, was a political strategist, was a lobbyist to really get legislation created and get policies in. As someone who lives and breathes policy, like this man is my hero. And so yeah, so like we celebrate that, like we celebrate our forefathers, our foremothers, our for thems and theys, especially when it comes to the creation of like pride celebrations. It was like trans folks who really led the way of like being like, we're here, we're queer, and we're gonna tell you how we feel about this. So I feel like that's what we should celebrate pride, and that's how I celebrate pride.
Right.
People may disagree with me on a few things, but yeah, that's where I come from. It's like it's understanding the work that's been done.
And that's so true. History, policies, foundation, guidelines. It's important. And that's what guides us and protects us and makes us more open to move forward in the community which we exist. And so Simone,
Exactly.
Simone, I'm gonna allow you to go to ask the next question.
Okay, yeah. KJ, your reason for celebrating Pride is sitting with me. It's like resonating with me. Yeah, I really, really like your reason behind it. So that's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, so my next question would be so there's sexual orientation and gender identity. So can you maybe tell us what the difference between the two are? I feel like some folks may not be aware of what the difference is.
Yeah. So, and I also would like to say that like I ain't no expert. I'm
Yeah,
always
yeah.
learning. I'm
Yeah.
always learning. I'm always
Listen, you're in
learning
the
throughout this
neighborhood.
journey.
You're in the neighborhood. This is the neighborhood conversation. This is why we're
Exactly.
doing this. So go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. But like when it comes to sexuality, it's more on um how do you interpret it, how you interpret love. Like, we are such a social species, and the idea of love and building a family and building who you are is so ingrained in our society and us as a species. Like, our survival, since we created civilizations, has been resulted in coming together. So I look at sexuality in how you interpret how you want to build your life once you leave that infancy stage and that adolescence and that teen stage of like how you want to build your life with someone. So I look at sexuality in that lens. I think of my gender studies professors. They may be like, you know better. You should need to be more critical with it. But that's how I've grown to look at it. And gender based is like, how do you see yourself as a person, and how you engage with space and place. That's a lot of work that I do is around placemaking and space. And we really look at your identity. People don't take into consideration their identity in these spaces. So when I look at gender identity, I look at how do you interact with space? How do you interact in society based on who you are? So that's how I would break it down. Maybe a little hippie, but like, I'm all about it.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
That's right.
great. Yeah.
That's how you have to be with these responses. So it connects me to my next question. As a member of the LGBTQ plus 2IA community, how would you encourage other allies to be better um, persons to ally for other marginalized groups within the LGBTQ 2IA plus community? How would you say that?
Like this is actually something that like I very much struggle with, because we're such in an era of performative allyship. And I, ever since the death of George Floyd, like growing up, like I've always seen a death of a like the idea of George Floyd has been
Right.
something I've seen my whole life. But because of the compound of like COVID and just like other injustices, I'm really been under. I've been really been trying to encourage folks, when you say the word allyship and when you want to be in conversation of being an ally, folks need to take into consideration the intersectionality of people and education and actually allowing first persons to have the opportunity to voice their opinion. So I look at me, for example, when people see me, I sound like a Canadian because like, I know how to code switch. But people don't know that I'm from the Caribbean or I'm from the Caribbean diaspora.
Yeah.
So my approach to being gay is compounded on the fact that, my country is not a developed country or developing country. It has different socioeconomic barriers. My country is still a British colony, so it still has colonization context with it, and especially with, how homosexuality was victimized within the Caribbean. That's how we were able to uphold colonization. And then add on to the fact that, you're an immigrant in a new place. So when you engage, I remember my first Pride, I was terrified, but everyone was pushing me because it's like, you got to go, you're gay. And
Mhm.
the amount of anxiety I felt from, experiencing my first Pride in a place where like I didn't know how I wanted to be as a gay male, which causes a lot of issues. So I always tell folks is educate and listen to the
Yeah.
person's point of view, and do your own research as well, so that the first person is not doing all the work unless you're paying them. If you're paying them to do this, that's another conversation. But like, if you want to be an ally, there needs to be a conversation around understanding those intersectionalities, because people's interaction with the community is so complex. Because, for the longest while, I did not want to associate myself with the community because of the racism I experienced from the gay community. So it was interesting dynamic that I had when I first started to really ask this question, because it was like, I'm gay, but then I don't, I'm receiving all of this um, discrimination and racism
Yeah.
from a community that's supposed to accept me.
Mhm.
So I always tell folks is understanding the story and understanding your historical context as well, of like the LGBT movement within your region, your town, your city, your place. And like, going back to what I said earlier, it's understanding place and how individuals interact with place.
Wow. Understanding place and how people interact with place and understanding the story, which is
Yeah.
so some people are not listeners. So then they don't like to listen. And how do you feel? Do you feel that you're heard? Or do you feel that we are heard in this current time in the workplace in general? How do you feel about that?
When it comes to being a
Our
part of the
community.
community,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um, I would say yes and no. Like it depends on the community and depends on like your confidence in it. Like me being able to have this conversation with my full name and like being like this is because of confidence. So it depends on people's journey. Like I'm candid. So like if I see something that I'm like, this ain't sparking joy for me, we need to get this in order. But that takes time to get to that point, and not everyone
Right.
has that. And I'm like that because I didn't have advocates. And that's the power of having advocates in workplaces where people are so, especially now with this like left and the right, and people with this cancel culture, people are so afraid to like mess up that
Yeah.
people it's safer in people's perception to keep quiet and not ask questions. But that,
Right.
in my opinion, causes more harm and causes more animosities, especially in the workplace in particular, where individuals aren't open to having these type of conversations that we're trying to have here today, where it's like, people need to have those conversations. I remember when my best friend and he was pushing me to go to this pride thing, and I had to say, well, bruh, like, you know, what if someone sees a picture and then like it goes back to Bermuda and I don't know what would happen there,
Yeah. Yeah.
or like, what if I'm at a pride parade and something happens to me and I receive racism, or the fact that like I went 19 years of my life in when I say in the closet, I mean like closet, like lights out in the corner, hiding type of closet. So how are you just going to be like, okay, you're just going to open up? Like, how can you prepare people, especially, as we focus a lot on like immigration and diversity and inclusion, that we're having this perception of what pride should be.
Yeah.
And I always ask people like, who's at the table? I always say like, who's at the table? Like when people are making HR policies when it comes to
Right.
LGBT, who's at that table?
Yeah.
And like, and how are we empowering first voices that actually have the power to create that self-determination so that they could create policies, or create programming that actually is beneficial to them. So it's taking the time to be like, it's okay to mess up, it's okay to be ignorant, like, but it's not okay to like allow your ignorance to create hate. If your ignorance is because of like not understanding on stuff like that, let's explore that and let's build a sense of education. But I'll be out here in these streets trying to be rude. No, no, it's
No,
not. It's not. It's not a vibe.
not gonna happen. Yeah, yeah. That's a really good response. So Moon, I'm gonna let you go ahead to ask the next question.
I look forward to my family's security in the future. That's the main goal as a father.
The empowerment from changing careers has really just made me want to get out of bed in the morning.
I'm looking forward to growing my business. So I want to hire people like I was hired. I want to give guys that chance.
Il me fera plaisir de continuer à travailler avec les immigrants francophones en Nouvelle-Écosse.
I'm looking forward to the financial freedom that I never had before.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Again, like your responses are sitting with me in a good way. So yeah, that's great. So yeah, the next question is, how should we respond if we are hearing rumors about someone, being lesbian or gay, bisexual, transgender? How should we respond to those types of rumors?
That's tough. Like it's really tough. But I always say like kindness, and like, I say that not like, don't make it seem like I'm like this saint.
He ain't.
Because like I have my days, but like,
Yeah.
I always try to hold the space
Right.
when I'm in interactions like this, especially when it comes to understanding identity or understanding individuals' personalities. I always try to like step in. But that first it comes with doing your own work, So I would say if you in your workplace are hearing racism, oh, no, sorry, wrong hat. If you're hearing like someone's coming out, like the first thing that I always tell folks to do is one, you got to put your big pants on and say, and go through the proper chain of command, and say like, this is happening. And I feel a little uncomfortable, and then allow the proper chain of commands to, actually start having these conversations. And then secondly, nip that in the bud. Like if people are going around your office space, that's like a whole other can of worms about like organizational behavior that's going to just like dilute your morale. So like if someone is like actively talking about that in the workplace, just like cut it out, like, and have that leadership capabilities to be like, yo, this is not cool for this workplace. This is not what is needed. And then like, if this individual wants to come out and say like, this is who they are, good on them, but like, it's none of your business. So like,
wanting to, like, they'll come out to you when they're ready type thing.
Exactly. So it's, so I always say that like, it's follow those proper chain of commands, nipping those rumors, because if someone's able to say a rumor about someone's sexuality, that is a sign of like, of the violence that like, goes back to what folks are working for. People need to take the time to be in their own journey to figure out how they want to be in this space. And I feel like this is gonna be my buzzword is like place. Like your environment is your place. So how individuals like to interact with that place need to be respected. And I do like a lot of work around psychological safety. That's the conversation when you get your boss or your supervisors to like, how can we develop a space of psychological safety within this place of employment and in this environment, so that like if there are questions or curiosities around sexuality or part of the LGBT community or pride in general, that we build up the tool kits so that people can have these type of conversations. Because what people fail to realize is sometimes when we have these type of conversations, especially when we're dealing with first person's voices, they cause harm. You don't know what people's lived experience are. And, you want people to come to work in their authentic self because it is proven. I don't have the stats with me, but when I did work when I was with the government of New Brunswick, I did a lot of work on diversity and inclusion strategy, and the research that we found was that when individuals come to work with their authentic self, productivity goes out of the roof because no one's thinking about, I gotta code switch, I gotta do this, I gotta like make sure I say partner and not boyfriend or girlfriend. So I would say that like it comes down to that place and like how good true leadership wants to create an inclusive mindset when it comes to the culture within the work environment.
Wow, that
That's my hot
place,
take.
the place
It goes
is in it,
it goes back to
it's
place. It goes back to
it's
place.
important, but how do you create that place? How do you create that place? What are some tips or some resources that people can look at when creating that place or that safe space for
Yeah.
conversations? Yeah.
I like first like be comfortable with being uncomfortable and being able to fail. Like that's my trigger where we're so rigid to be like we have to do this, we got to do this. Like no, you got to mess it up. You got to be uncomfortable. You have to um, learn how to
Right.
be. You have to be able to be. You have to learn how to be able to be in uncomfortable situations, but be respectful. That's how you can know that you have developed true organic inclusion, because like what we're doing now is very strategic inclusion and strategic diversity, which has a purpose for someone else. That's not organic. That's not how the world lives. Like I find it very fascinating that everyone's always fascinated about inclusion. It's like, oh, we got to be inclusive. Like how can we do that when this planet that we're on survives on organic inclusion? Like if you look at the ecosystem when it comes to a healthy forest survives because it's diverse. Cities are successful because they are diverse.
Yeah.
I always tell folks who are just like, oh, we talk about diversity and inclusion too much. I'm like, your wealth portfolio is successful because it's diverse. So
Yeah.
like if we're able to do these things when we develop organic inclusions in ways that's beneficial, and we do that because we fail. We
Yeah.
need, as a society, embrace the idea of failure, especially when it comes to leadership. And leaders need to understand that, they need to show by example by saying, okay, I messed up around this topic. Let's have a collective conversation. And then two, investing in developing good organizational behavior. Like everyone makes fun of the HR department. I love HR. I actually went to university for HR because it's so important to understand group dynamics and team
Right.
dynamics, and to ensure that you're able to build groups that can have good psychological safety to, one, be productive, but two, be able to have that organic inclusion where you're developing good citizens who understand that once they leave that workspace, they're going into society. So if they're able to go into society and have that mindset of having that psychological safety, good organic inclusion, the rippling effects that someone has simply by just taking the time to ask questions, educate themselves, and allowing it to be structured in a way that's beneficial just think about the positive impact that could happen in society when employers actually help places be organic in society. So I would say that's the first step. And it's not like big, I see a lot of people hiring these D&I consultants, which, they trigger me sometimes, but I'm also like, interesting. But like, but instead of having these big consultants from these big firms, like
Right.
you have experts in your community. Like it always makes me laugh when we fly someone into Toronto to talk about inclusion when you have so many good people within our cities, our towns, and our
Mm-hmm.
communities who wake up every day and say, I choose to develop organic inclusion. Like, why aren't we having conversations about building up our internal and local capacity to develop organizational behavior that has an inclusive mindset? So I would say that's the first step. Don't be running out decorating your office without having these type of conversations. You may scare someone, but
Yeah.
I would say that's the first step.
And I totally agree. Don't be decorating your office with so much pride flags and if you don't know exactly what it means, and if you don't respect, you're just putting it up because of the awareness. No, that's we only have pride in Halifax for a week or but pride is every day. We celebrate pride every day. And that's how we should act in that
Yeah,
way. And like I say, the policies, the governance, the structures that you talked about just now, KJ, so important, very
yeah,
important. Totally
yeah.
agree.
Because I see these. I always love when June comes because it's like all like I saw memes of it like where like you see like the normal logo and then boom, you got the rainbows. So
Yeah.
one thing that I like to do in my I don't have my shades, but like when I be shady, I message these organizations, being like, what are your policies that are dedicated for your LGBT community employees?
Right.
Ghosts, crickets, like
Yeah.
so like I always say that like and I always encourage, and this is one thing that that folks can take away, like if you're seeing your employer putting up these pride flags, like ask the question, like, what are our policies, what are our procedures, what are our educations, how are we developing this sense of organic inclusion within the LGBTQ community, like how are we being allies, like ask the questions, like and that's a form of allyship that people fail to realize, like yeah, that because that's where people need it. They need it the most. They need it in the workplace because that's dealing with your livelihood. You don't want to rock the boat. Like, we live in a society where, you go to work and you don't, rock the boat. You try to, you stay on the good and narrow. You try to conform yourself to that culture. And if
Right.
that culture is not designed to allow individuals to come to themselves authentically, what
Right.
type of harm are we putting to people when majority of our lives are dedicated in work? Like, we're working 40 hours a week in work dealing with that. So what is the compound and like, me, I always think big. What is the social and community risk to not having inclusive workplaces when it comes to the LGBT community? It's economic
Wow.
policy. Like, being inclusive is good economic policy.
See, now we gotta welcome you on the podcast to talk about economic policies, because then I'll cause into a different conversation on policy development and why policy development is important. I think that's important because
Mhm.
that's how communities are structured, and how we actually accept people based on the policies and the guidelines that we set before ourselves in order for us
Ex-
to have a smooth transition. Yeah, yeah. I
Exactly.
totally agree.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up today's podcast, KJ, I want to end with this. I want to end with this question. If someone wants advice on what to tell their roommate, friends, or family about being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, how can they help? What can they say to others who want to educate their roommates and friends and family members?
I would say first, if it's the individual who's a part of the community, Um, find an elder. Find someone who's willing to talk to you, and find someone who's willing to provide that governance. Sorry, that guidance. There we go. Wrong hat again.
Governance.
Um, I love. You can tell I love
I
governance.
I can tell. I can tell.
But like, having that mentorship, I wouldn't be here today and have this confidence if it wasn't for the individuals coming to me and actually providing me with that blanket of calmness and healing needed to be in the space to talk. Like that, being able to articulate, hey, I am, is one of the hardest things, or it gets me like teary-eyed just thinking about it. It's it's one of the hardest things that you have to do, and it's one thing that people fail to realize is that you come out once, but every single time you're interacting with someone new, you are having that briefing moment of like, okay, I'm coming out again. This could
Yeah.
go very good or very bad. You don't know where it's going to be. So I would say first do that, and like you don't like one thing. I Not to sound that I'm old, but in my day, I I was not connected to the world, so the fact that young folks nowadays have platforms, like I have my opinions on social media, but I find it beautiful where you have kids and young folks who are able to use these platforms to be allies for each other and be like sounding boards for each other, and like you're connecting adults, you're connecting young people, and you're connecting folks in ways that you can have these organic conversations. So I'll say start there, and then individuals, regardless, we should start having conversations about our fellow citizens, like
Right.
period. Like
Right.
that's the like at the end of the day, we all pay taxes to Uncle Justin. Like like the CRA doesn't look at us and say like, okay, so this person's like straight, so we're gonna do this. Like when it comes to being on, when it comes to being in this country, we all, whether you're a permanent resident, you're a permanent resident of Canada or Canadian, you're living within these jurisdictions. So we should just take the time to understand who our citizens are so that we can be allies regardless. I feel like that's Canada's competitive advantage is embracing inclusion. As bad as, we have our issues around the topic around inclusion, Canada is growing to be this inclusive mecca of a country. And like we're at ground level, like we're just starting with this. So if everyone just takes time, just takes one day to understand something new about a different demographic within this country, let's just think of how powerful we can actually be when we're taking the time to understand folks. Like, not to change the topic, not talk about someone else, but like I always say, like my partner is from Quebec, and I never you always hear negative connotations about Quebec being separatist and all the cats meow, but it took me taking the time to understand the history of Quebec, understand the history of the French language and how culture plays a role and identity and how individuals interact with place, right? That where that not I won't say venom, but like where that passion for protectionist comes from. And when people talk, when like other people who are not from Quebec look at Quebec, you always have these lists of things that you say. I'm not saying Quebec is perfect; it has its issues, but what if we all took the time to understand the perspective of Quebec? How about if we took the time to take the perspective of like someone who's a part of the LGBTQ community who lives in Canada who's Indigenous, or who is from a rural community, or who's African or Scotian, or who's Black, or who's this, like and really taking the time to really embrace what does it mean to be a inclusive society that takes into account of the intersectionality of its people. And I feel like that's my takeaway. It's like that's the homework we all have to do, is taking that time to educate ourselves and listening and researching and like pushing that narrative out and allowing people to like be a part of the conversation.
And there you have it. That's just how we need to end this podcast. Set a space, create the space, educate yourself, make sure those policies are in line, create those policies, review those policies, edit those guidelines that accepts us as a community in order to move forward. KJ, Simone, I thank you both. One, KJ, I thank you for being an amazing guest, to providing
Oh,
resources and
Yes, thank
advocacies.
you.
And Simone, thank you for being an amazing co-host alongside me. I can't do without the co-host, you know. Just making
Thanks for
sure that we,
having me.
just making sure that we continue to advocate and educate people within our neighborhood. At the Neighborhood Conversations, we invite people to connect, and this is our way of connecting to celebrate Pride Month. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you at the next episode. This podcast is funded by the Government of Nova Scotia.